Okay, so what I did today was basically I gave you our whole strategic plan, which has a ton of information about the Boston Public Schools and all of our strategies. And there's no way I can take 16 years and sum it up for you in 8 minutes, which I believe was my task. So what I'm going to do basically is you now have the strategic plan, and I'm going to spend maybe 5 minutes telling you what I think are the most important things that we should pay attention to for based on part of what I've heard today as people were talking, I was retyping, and then just share with you some data for you to ponder, and then be happy to answer any questions. But you have our whole strategic plan. But let me give you a little context. About 15 years ago, the mayor of Boston said we want to do universal preschool. My first question was, do you want to do it in community-based programs, or do you want to do it in the public schools? He said, we can't do it in community-based programs. They don't get paid enough for it. There's not enough resources. I want to do it in the public schools. So we opened up about 2,800 and not classrooms, spaces in about 150 classrooms in the Boston Public Schools for 4-year-olds. And then we always knew that we wanted to do community-based programs as well. And so we did a pilot, and then we got some private funding to do it. And then we got the preschool enhancement, the PEG grant, preschool enrichment grant. I don't even remember what it's called anymore. And then when those federal dollars went away, the new mayor basically kicked in money. And so we now have about a quarter of our preschool slots are in community-based programs, and the rest are in the public schools. So know that this is really a city initiative that is mostly funded by the city, that the dollars are funded in the public schools. And what we do is, as we expand the community-based program, which we are sort of calling UPK, but it just means in community-based, and the public school system is driving this. And the dollars are mostly city dollars. Okay, so here are the points that I think you all should take away based on what I heard today. You can't pay people less than target. It's a really hard job, and you should pay public school wages. So our starting teachers in the community-based programs earn the same salary as a Boston public school teacher. They're not in the union scale, so it stops there. We do allow for increase, but we require that they have a bachelor's degree in the community-based program, and that they get the same starting salary. That, of course, meant that the director was getting paid less than the teachers, so we allowed for money for directors and assistant teachers. In fact, we encouraged it, and as Valora says, it's a direct requirement, and we tracked that their salaries are included, and it has lifted salaries of other staff. So just so you know, that's a requirement. It's funny, one of the presenters earlier was saying, well, you need competencies, and she walked out competency 1, 2, and 3. I think you need certification. I think it needs to be comparable to the public schools. I think, frankly, we just need a teaching and educational certification system. And it's probably sadly going to be state bound, though it would be nice if there was a national one. Again, because you need that in order to get paid. And since we're talking about paying people, we just need to help people get there, but we need definitely to pay them. You need, Michelle and others have talked about professional learning systems. So we have coaches. Our coaches are long-term teachers or directors of programs, and they support robust professional learning. It's not just one and done. We do 3 to 5 days in the beginning, but then we do monthly or biweekly coaching depending on where the program is. And we build a lot of professional learning communities, and we support principals who are interested and directors. And so really kind of building that ongoing professional learning. And not only that, we now focus on our curriculum, and so we have a course on our curriculum that you can get course credit for or not. And again, of course, there's issues around writing and access and success in the course. So thinking through all of those things. And just to give you a sense, even when you have a bachelor degree teacher and you give them credit and you pay for it, only about half of them make it through the course. And so we're working on why that is and what we can do to change that course. So all of this stuff sounds good, but when you start doing it in practice, you're only going to be roughly 50% successful in the beginning. Obviously, there are people who have done it better than us, but just giving you a sense of scale. The other thing is in community-based programs. So if you take the actually a shift in the public schools, we actually have something called common planning time, in which kids go to a science specialist, or they'll go outside and do physical activity, or they'll do some PE or something. So teachers actually have a common planning time that they get on a regular basis. In community-based programs, you have nap time, and that's about it. So developing structures to really think about how teachers work together, how they plan, how they look at student work, how they do differentiation. That's a structural thing that does not exist in community-based programs, but exists in the public schools. So again, not only do you have to have coaching and sports, you have to have time for planning. You should have a standard aligned, strong curriculum that's anti-racist, equitable, and standard. Oh, I said standards aligned already, but you know, we have shifted. You know, when we first started, we were like early childhood principles, Reggio, you know, really strong observation and documentation. We've also now, because again, we're situated in a public school and we've learned a lot, the science of reading and some of the skill-based stuff that kids need to learn. So we're really trying to combine a curriculum that really teaches kids how to read and write and communicate, but also gets them to ask all the big important questions, and does so in a loving, joyous way. And so in some of my slides later on, you can go down on your own, but you'll see kind of the pieces of our curriculum. All right, so other things you need to have, whoops, I'm gonna go back. So I was just trying to move, my little bar is in the way. So I'm just trying to move the bar without, there, I get it. Okay, so the other thing is you need to have some other structures in community-based programs that make it work. So you need comprehensive services. Beverly just talked about sort of the relationship building and the traumatic experiences and brain development. And so you really need to have comprehensive services, special ed services, family engagement strategies, community building strategies, supports for directors. The other thing is community-based programs don't have consistent budgets like the public schools. So, you know, really trying to build stability in the program. And some of those things will reduce a lot of the turnover that Daphne is talking about, because even when you pay people, there's still a lot of budget instability in community-based programs. And so that's a piece of what you have to think through. The other thing is we require NAEYC accreditation for programs. We do have a QRS program, but NAEYC, with the way we've done it with coaching, 3-year supports, really helps to build stability into the program and make them think systematically, intentionally, and meaningfully about what a strong early childhood program means. And so that's been another structure that we put in place. Then a lot of the data I'm about to show you really is about the public schools, but even if you do really strong early childhood practice and you do it high quality and you pay people, you'll get a nice gain, but you'll lose it in the public schools. You've heard it talked about a fade out effect. It's really around alignment, and it's really about fixing the public schools. So I think this work cannot be done alone, just, oh, let's fix community-based programs, or, oh, let's do it in the public schools. I think we really need to think of an aligned system. And so, oh, wow, that moved a lot faster than I wanted to, hang on. And so it's not just the curriculum, which I'll walk you through, but it's enrollment policies. We are leveraging now behavioral and special educational supports from the public schools. We actually have full-time equivalents that are in the public schools that are now working in community-based programs. And so that's been a great connection through this. As I mentioned, the program is city funded, but it sits in the budget of the public schools. So every time we think of like a new thing, like, oh, we want to add special ed FTEs, we do that first through the city with a trust, and then in year 2, it becomes part of the Boston Public Schools ongoing budget. So that's sort of the layout of this now. I'm just going to quickly click you through a couple pieces of data. This just says that it makes a difference, but on the right is class, and what you see in the class basically is grade 1, 2, and 3. Those red, those are quality scores. So even if you do well in preschool and kindergarten, you've got to worry about 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade as well. And so that's what we did in 2012, which then helped us write our own curriculum. And so we've written our curriculum, and that's what kids are experiencing, but not all schools are experiencing, which is what I'm going to move you through. Okay, so, and this just is a way of showing you how, when you come up with an idea, then how do you operationalize it, and then how does it become projects, and then how does the budget connect to it, both in personnel. So it's just showing you kind of the process of how we measure ourselves all the time. And these are just examples of what's in our curriculum, pre-K all the way to second. And this is just all the different pieces of our curriculum. But again, I'm not going to walk you through that. The last thing I want to kind of leave you with is a Fidelity study that Michelle actually helped. Michelle came with our staff, and we defined the components of our curriculum and how to measure them. Because it's one thing to say, hey, use our curriculum. It's another thing to say, use it with fidelity and use it with quality. And then what we did is, and I don't know if you know about Boston, but Boston is an autonomous school district. We can't just come in and tell people they have to do anything. And so each school will decide whether or not they're using our curriculum. And each community, in the community-based programs, they all use our curriculum. But even if everybody is using our curriculum, you can see that there's variation in quality of fidelity, and in continuation of that fidelity. So what you see here basically is only about a third of our schools, which is the second bar, high, about a third of our schools have high quality fidelity instruction from pre-K and K aligned. So that means 2/3 of our schools, or 3/4 roughly, yeah, it's a little, it's like more like 2/3 are not high fidelity all the way through. So just imagine, even if you have a Department of Early Childhood and we're aligning all of this stuff, between pre-K and K, you don't get as much alignment. And that alignment is related to vocabulary. Is related to student outcomes. And so you can see in the high category, you're getting your strongest PPVT scores, which is vocabulary. And in your lowest aligned schools, where they never really implemented the curriculum very well, again, if you're not paying people and they're turning over and they're not as well educated, you're going to get more low. And you can see, sadly, that it's related with outcomes. And then the next slide shows you that, sadly, this is related with income of students. So if you're poor, you're less likely to have an aligned curricular experience. And then if you are Latinx, you are the least likely to have an aligned curriculum experience. And this is public school data, and this is with all of the investments we made. So I think I will stop there. So I stop sharing and leave time for discussion with all of us. But it's just to say that roll up your sleeves. This is a lot of work. It costs a lot of money. And if you want to do it well and you want to do it right, then it's going to take a lot of thinking and work. And it's not going to be a single policy lever. And it's got to be an alignment between the public schools and community-based programs. So that's me. I'm done. Happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jason. So yeah, please, if you have questions for Jason or anyone on our panel, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask them. You can put those in the chat as well. So please go ahead with that. With some of our time, I'm sure I could come up with a question for Jason. That was fascinating. Can you talk about, by the efforts you've made to pay teachers more and get parity to K-12, are your retention rates different from what we saw Daphne describe? And are you seeing some of your training pay off over time?
Yeah, okay. We have lower turnover. And I think one of the big punchlines is community-based programs can offer as high quality as public schools. It's not a question of setting, but in community-based settings, there are structures that need to be put in place and supports. And so, yes, turnover has definitely gone down, but we've had programs where the teachers leave even though we're paying them, but the director stays. So we've done work with the directors. And again, it is stability of budgets and is a piece of this that has to be supported. So we have all sorts of differentiated strategies depending on the type of program.
Great, thank you. Beverly, Beverly, please.
I wanted to just add a word about that. I completed a study recently of universal pre-kindergarten sites in New York City. And we looked at 9 different sites across 3 different districts in New York City that were socioeconomically different. and we looked at both public school settings as well as the community-based centers. And what we actually found was that there was way less, there was way more turnover in the community-based centers. When we went back a year and a half later, most of the teachers we studied were gone. But when we did study them, we found that they were more knowledgeable about the teachers in those centers and the supports in those centers were more knowledgeable about child development and early childhood education, and that the centers provided more comprehensive services than were available through the New York City public school system, and that the match between the cultural and racial backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds of the children and the families was much greater in the community-based organizations. So it kind of just wanted to amplify all these points that people are making about the importance of reaching our entire profession, and also that often in the public school system, at least in New York, people move down into the lower grades who have not had backgrounds in early childhood. And the folks who are coming up through the early childhood system in the community-based centers are often the ones who work their way from often parent or to volunteer to aide to assistant teacher to lead teacher. So they are more grounded in understanding young children often.
Great, thank you for that, Beverly. And I see one more question in the chat. I believe this may be for Jason, but it is, what is the relationship between the community and public programs? And more specifically, is there a relationship and do they collaborate with each other?
So when we first started, they hated us. I'm going to be honest, we opened up free public school, free pre-K. They didn't hate is the wrong word, but I'm joking. But it was definitely a threat to their business, and it has taken years to rebuild that relationship. And now we have a really strong relationship with community-based providers. And it has been because we have built this with them with respect. And I think the curriculum was never really a challenge. Like, I think they really loved the curriculum. I think it was just that we basically say, if you get into the public schools, K through your child is set for the next 8 years, right? Because they're going to stay all the way to 6th grade, or in some of our schools, we actually go to 8th grade. If you go to a community-based program, you're not guaranteed a space in that school. So if you get into a K-1 in Boston Public Schools, you stay in that school. So it took us 3 years to develop and have the school committee, to which, by the way, enrollment and the school committee were really behind it. And that's the other thing, is the city and the superintendent and the school committee have all really had a very pro-community-based approach, in that they want to solve some of these challenges. So we developed a connector where if you go to a community-based program, you will have access to a seat in the public schools and you get priority. So we worked that one through. And we've also just we have a directors group, we have an executive directors group, we have a family stakeholder group. There's a lot more grown trust and respect that has taken years to build. And that doesn't come overnight, and it certainly doesn't come from a mayor deciding that he wants to do public school preschool. But he wasn't wrong, because he was able to really move the dial on student outcomes. And it's just, how do we effectively produce strong outcomes, if that's the goal of early childhood, and build community-based programs at the same time, and go only as fast as you can do it well. So the public schools were able to open up 2,800 spaces relatively fast, and community-based programs, we've been incremental in designing this, and we have about 600 or 700 kids served. We could do more. Programs are not applying, in part because they cannot produce. teachers with bachelor's degree, nor do they feel like they can pay that much. And then there is resistance in the Head Start community because they're already doing their own thing and they already have resources. And so there is that challenge. There are some Head Start programs that are doing it, but overall, I think thinking through Head Start and the public schools is something that has to be thought through more carefully.